I see. My ass.
No complaining.
So, with Persona 5 Royal having been released on the time of this video, I'm probably enjoying it right now.
Talk about bullshit.
Pretty far away, and Anne is surprised to see a town at all, so I guess they just didn't drive through it on the way to the pyramid, even though that they're literally shown to be driving through a town on the way to the pyramid in the animated cutscene. Now, when it comes to Futaba's dungeon itself, there's a lot to say about it. For starters, why is it a pyramid at all? Futaba has nothing to do with Egypt, and neither does her mom.
I figure it's time that I actually cover a video that I've been wanting to hit for a while, but unfortunately, due to the sheer length of the video,
how dare you!
And since I actually want to have a semblance of an outside life of YouTube and don't want my editor to go insane.
One of the biggest problems with the game is all of the issues surrounding the combat, which are numerous and feel especially bad considering the bulk of the gameplay consists of combat.
You'll have to forgive me if I don't want to make a 10-hour-long commentary. So for those who don't know what the hell I'm talking about, I'm referring to that one video critiquing Persona 5 for 5 hours.
What now?
Yeah, 5 hours. Persona 5 Style Over Substance by Cvit. Cvit. How do you pronounce his name? Whatever. I'd have to be nuts to want to cover that kind of video, and since I actually don't want people to go crazy watching that kind of length, I'll be going over my general issues with the video along with pretty specific examples to back up my points. Then again, knowing my luck, people will just think I'm hating on Cvit and will claim me to be a fanboy of Persona 5 who can't stand seeing criticism of the game, and will claim that I'm just cherry-picking his points, despite the fact that I'm also saying that his video isn't entirely bad, but at the same time there are issues that make it hard to actually take serious. And ow! Before I get too deep, like I said, there are good points in the video, and I don't want to make it seem like it's a total garbage fire, but it's a video that I highly disagree with, both with points and in structure. Which leads into my first point. So there's been a bit of a trend on YouTube that's been cropping up in the last couple of years, and that's the long-ass video essays. Whether it be by television shows, films, or video games, these type of videos have somehow become extremely popular. To top it off, there are usually a level of snarkiness mixed in with a commentary about why something popular is bad. Finding trouble, never looking too hard. Now, that's a typical title. But there have been many critics who don't formulate it like that, so I'm trying to be fair, but it doesn't negate the fact that these sort of videos do exist and have become popularized. Hell, most of the time the commentator in this has their head up their own ass and act like, "Whoa, man, you just blew my mind. Your opinion is a beacon of hope and Now, you may be wondering why I call this the Joseph Anderson effect. Well, for the saps who are lucky enough not to hear of him, he's a video game critic who's garnered himself quite a following on YouTube for exactly that, making super long analysis videos that go into uber detail about things, even to things that don't really need that much. Look, you can tell me all you want that Super Mario Odyssey isn't a masterpiece, but when you're asking for 2 hours of my life that's filled with overly repetitive drivel as well as...
God forbid someone provide examples and breakdowns of their arguments, which refer an image or 10 bullet points typed in it. Holy shit, it's just his opinion, and if you watch it, he put a lot of work into constructing his argument. He's not asking to agree with him, he's just sharing his thoughts.
Yeah. And this is a trend of videos that I've seen for a while, and there have been a few reasons why I hate this sort of long-form content. And this can be applied to Cvit's video as well. It makes it very hard to pay attention to the whole video. When I go into a video, I typically go to hear opinions on things, and I shouldn't be taking notes in this situation, especially if I find issues with it. It makes it a chore to actually respond to, because honestly a lot of these videos tend to have conflicting points and issues. Not saying every long-form video does this, but as I'll demonstrate with Cvit's video, it's something that does occur. And there's too much on the negatives. I know it's a bit redundant to bring this up, especially when you consider the following titles. It's no masterpiece, blank is garbage and here's why, and this game sucks!
I solved this boat in half!
However, when you have dedication to so much runtime to just focusing on the negatives, that tends to blow them up to be bigger issues than they need to be. To give an example of Cvit's video right here,
do tend to get predictable over the course of the game. That's my biggest complaint about the music here. By the 80th hour, I could predict all the story beat musics that are going to happen in the moment-to-moment gameplay. And when scenes start to go on for really long times, upwards to 20 minutes, keeping the same track looping gets really old and kind of annoying.
This sounds like a standard complaint, right? The music gets old after 80 hours. Alright, but you can say that of pretty much any song in the entire world. Doesn't matter how good of a song is, and it's a generic complaint. Anything can get annoying after so long. But I'd also like to point out this isn't only an issue if you're playing Persona 5 in either one sitting, which I envy how much free time you got, or playing in sittings so close to each other that it might as well be one sitting. And even then, you have to consider a second playthrough as a matter here.
As I started replaying the game for this video, Persona 5 The Royal got out.
Now, to be fair, Cvit did say that he went through a second playthrough after a while, but that opens up a few questions that really get into later. On another note, is this really an issue with the game, or is it a personal gripe? And even then, what is this?
Scenes start to go on for really long times, upwards to 20 minutes. Keeping the same track looping gets really old and rather annoying.
Persona 5 gives the player the option to not only fast forward through scenes, but skip them entirely. It's a complaint that doesn't really deserve to be in the video, and there are other complaints that are reeled throughout Cvit's video that are like this, which I'll get into another part of the video, but funnily enough, Cvit actually brings up some positives about the game. But, in regards to that, he'll actually blow up the negatives to an insane degree. Here's another example.
English voice acting is good for the most part, with the only glaring issue being the asinine pronunciation of names that happens throughout the game. This is more so a failure on the voice director than the actors themselves. There is no justification for the wrong names since they sound completely different from the Japanese dub, and the interpretation of names sounds so different as to being entirely different words. Even considering the fundamental differences in language, the way that it's done is just plain bad.
Sakamoto.
That voice! Sakamoto?
This was from the Japanese clients who suggested they pronounce it like this. And Tamaki's VA, Erica Harlicher, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, stated this to be the case. This was also mentioned back in 2017, mind you, so there was plenty of time to do some research. And for a video this big, and one where he outright says,
And if I'm going to critique the game that everyone seems to love, then I'm gonna go all the way with it. I played through this game when it came out and hated it, and replaying it now only made me realize all the things that I missed that made it even worse. So I have a lot of shit to say. Today we'll be looking at every part of Persona 5, what Atlas got right, what they got wrong, and the why of it all. Now,
we're covering everything. You'd think that Cvit would at least try to look into this information to make sure that his assumptions are actually correct, and, you know, not blow up in his face. Even going so far as to...
My fatty tuna! No complaining.
with the blind praise it seems to get oh so often, and that fueled me even more since I never see any of the real issues that permeate down to the game's core being discussed in any worthwhile fashion.
Did you guys know that when Persona 5 first came out, it was met with some odd criticism? It had to do with the localization, the script, and such. And this is something that Cvit likes to point out. Don't get me wrong, there are times where he is correct. He is a Scum is a prime example of this. That being said,
Entirely different words. Even considering the fundamental differences in language, the way that it's done is just plain bad.
Sakamoto.
That voice! Sakamoto?
Nice!
where he falls flat on his face with his two prime examples. Allow me to go with a more egregious one. In his videos, Cvit brings up the fan site.
Errors are present throughout the game. There's an entire website dedicated to compiling every single error in the game. There's an entire website dedicated to compiling every single error in the game.
Oh boy, Cvit, thank you so much for proving that you are hating on the game so much. Now you people may be asking, what is the reason for that? Well, let's talk about this and go into the past. Now, I'm not going to say the game's script is perfect, it's not. But to reference this website is really telling of Cvit wanting to make the game look worse than it actually is. 2 years ago, there was a bit of a buzz surrounding Persona 5, with articles and translators coming out to talk about its script, with this website being at the center of it. Not only is this website actually run by translators who are amateurs at this time, but have also defended the translation of Fire Emblem Fates. And if you know anything about that, I think you get the reason why. But if you look towards the site, they cherry pick examples and don't actually include the context of who is actually saying what. Here's an example of that provided by another YouTuber.
Let's take this one for instance.
Are you a part-timer? I'm surprised this place can afford one.
That's exactly the case.
The writer states that this is a bad localization because the character states that's exactly the case, when it is, well, not the case. This delivery is what we call deadpan. This is more common in English than Japanese, so you could say this is a very good localization choice. Another example is this line, that while yes it is awkward, it's not bad localization, and here's why.
Hey. Mimir. Okay? miss anything?
This character is meant to be an awkward NEET. Her name is even based on the precursor site to 2chan. This is another sign of a good localization. Characters shouldn't all speak in the same mannerisms and terms. Some people are just awkward. Some people don't speak in the most proper way. This is again a point in the localization's favor. Then again, some of these professionals criticizing the localization, their only criteria is translating a niche fan game, or Anthony Birch and his horrible writing style. Some things become a bit more apparent when you look at it that way.
Not only does the fan site ignore this context, but then you've got people like Cvit here who will spread it around. You want another example of the fan site? Here you go. I can't believe you mistook my aunt for someone like her. And here is the actual context.
More importantly, what is this place? Why has the school turned into something like this?
I can't believe you mistook my aunt for someone like her.
This isn't a translation error. This is simply a different way of saying the line that ignores that Shadow Kamoshida is a pompous ass and is dressing his guards. And there's another thing that this translator site and Cvit himself do not take in consideration. That characters don't speak in the same mannerisms and terms as each other. And even then, not everyone speaks in the most proper of ways. I certainly don't, and neither do the characters. So, too long didn't watch, this is a terrible website to reference, and only goes to show that Cvit pretty much typed in why Persona 5 sucks, and got this popping up in a Google search result. He just plops it on your table and expects you to swallow it whole. Which a lot of people did. And then we get to another example with Cvit actually cutting context. It's something that he does a lot in this video, as I will demonstrate.
Just to give you an idea of how bad some of these are, here's a couple examples. At one point in the game's English class, the teacher has the line, "Just to say heavy rain, as many things fall, there are countries in the world."
Has you really been far, even as decided to use even go want to look more like?
Now think about that for a minute. What does that even mean? Do you have any idea what this line is even trying to say? The message it's trying to convey is that every language has its own way of saying it's raining cats and dogs when referring to heavy rain. But I have no idea how anyone is supposed to understand that from the way that the line was translated.
You see, most sane people would naturally leave the line and context that came before it, which you so clearly cut from your video in order to make this point. More specifically, the line, additionally, in Norwegian, they say it's raining witches, and in Polish, they say it's raining frogs. Now, what would happen if we were to combine these two lines together? Additionally, in Norwegian, they say it's raining witches, and in Polish, they say it's raining frogs. Just to say heavy rain, as many things fall as there are countries in the world. Cvit ignores everything before this scene and zeroes in on this one line and takes it out of context. Even if you want to say the phrase itself is awkward, the context of the scene around it already gives meaning to the phrase being that apparently the player is going to be able to get. There is an issue with this and it's due to the punctuation, but that's due to how the text box is formatted. I don't think I need to tell you this, but if you're actively removing context from the scenes in order to make your point, then your point is dishonest and casts doubt on your other points too, and frankly, that's pretty terrible. Just finished the Persona 5 style over substance video. Love or hate Cvit, he was spitting straight facts. Spitting straight facts, huh? Oh yeah, using a site that's been heavily criticized for being incompetent and removing context is totally spitting straight facts, huh? What's worse is the Confidants section, and before I get to that, I want to point out a small portion here. During the point of Chiaya, he discusses the cult, Cvit makes a pretty bold claim.
The next scene with her involves saying that she has apologized to all the ADP members and has paid back everyone she has sold a holy stone to. There's a bunch of weird things that are brought up here the game of course never addresses, like how she came up with the millions of yen needed to pay back everyone who bought a holy stone from her, or what—
how did she make all that money to return?
What the hell are you thinking?
It really shows a lack of reading comprehension and poor editing when your own footage shoots your point in the foot. As you can see here, I'm going to give back all the money I made. Meaning, she hasn't done it yet. And this is the problem with the length of the video. There are tons of mistakes like this, where Cvit will outright misread or skip important text in the game that shows his laziness in the video, and will use that laziness in order to berate the game. So I'm sorry to say that he's straight up spitting facts is wrong. It comes off as people didn't actually pay attention to the content of the game or the video itself. It's not the fault of the game if you can't pay attention.
I see. My ass.
Oh boy, this is a bit of a mess. Look, there are good criticisms, and while there are puzzling parts of this section of the video, in order to make sure my editor doesn't go crazy we'll just be going over a handful of examples. Probably one of the worst examples would have to be his segment on Futaba.
The first main party member up is Futaba, the socially inept ultra hacker gamer girl. First thing you'll notice when hanging out with her is how incredibly annoying her dialogue is. She can't go 2 sentences without making some totally relatable nerd culture analogy, even when talking about things completely unrelated to them, like the high-level police officer who scares her in her very first confidant rank. The references she makes are all over the place, and over the course of the game, you'll see the countless allusions to Pokemon, Star Wars, 4chan, YouTube, Dungeons & Dragons, anime, tokusatsu memes, and basically anything remotely related to the internet. Despite all of these, the game never actually shows Futaba having any interest in any of these things outside of casual references she makes.
I see. My ass!
Right.
And it feels like Atlus wanted to have a generally nerdy character as a catch-all for people who think making references to pieces of media is a personality, even when it goes directly against how she's portrayed otherwise.
Like, this is technically a minor complaint, and I understand that people can get upset with having references shoved down their throat. I know I do. I've said it before. But this criticism really goes to show that Cvit didn't pay attention to any of the references that the other characters made. There's a JoJo and Dragon Ball reference that the protagonist can make to a teacher. There's a protagonist can make a Pokemon reference to the Morgana. An makes a reference to Lupin III. Morgana makes a reference to My Neighbor Totoro, and also makes a Kamen Rider pose before returning into a vehicle. Yusuke is the one who makes the Ginyu Force reference with Futaba's Featherman figures. Ryuji and Makoto make a reference to the song Wanted Dead by Bon Jovi. Kamoshida's Shadow makes a reference to Lord of the Rings. Kanshiro makes a Transformers reference. I think I've made my bloody point. And if you don't believe me, there's a whole page of this on the TV Tropes page. Hell, Akechi himself is a walking Death Note reference, even making a reference to apples in the
Give me the strangest looks when I buy just a single apple for lunch.
game. Does Futaba make more references than the other characters? Yes, but it's a gross overgeneralization to make the character look bad. It's almost as if Cvit is outright ignoring things that go against his preconceived notion that the game is bad.
I do not like Persona 5. I think it's a bad game.
Hell, still going with Futaba, he makes this claim.
The game honestly just moves on without addressing anything about the lifetime of abuse that Kana has suffered or any possible repercussions the parents should have to face. Futaba met Kana when they were in elementary school, which starts at 7, and she's 15 when you meet her. So they've been possibly abusing her for over a decade, and the game acts as it is all okay because the parents said sorry. No drama whatsoever from potentially almost a decade of abuse.
Here's the thing, we do not know exactly when the events in elementary school occurred for Futaba. Cvit instantly assumes that this is just trying to make the situation worse than it could possibly be, and he doesn't even entertain the possibility in his video. He just goes with the worst possible interpretation to make it seem like Persona 5 mishandled the subject matter worse than it possibly could be. Maybe the abuse has been going on for 10 years, maybe it's going on for 3. We simply don't know, but we can't make assumptions and then lambast the game for said assumptions. This also goes into the other 2 issues that I have. One I'll get into later in more detail, but one more prominent is Cvit constantly brings up, why doesn't anyone go to the police? He does this with Chihaya, Futaba, and does it with Sojiro's confidant portions.
Why did nobody involved in this report him to the police after they found out how the uncle was treating Futaba? Sometimes the drug members go missing and are never seen again. Chihaya feels terrible about having supported this organization, so of course
It is also the matter of Kawakami's confidant that Cvit covers, and this is a big one because he lambasts how Kawakami isn't standing up for herself when she gets blackmailed.
Rhymes.
And basically uses it as a crutch to say the game shoehorns in mementos.
Except that's not actually what happens, because Mementos needs to be shoehorned in here for some reason.
When you have to change someone's heart, then affecting your confidants. However, the issue is that in some cases, like with Chihaya, she has no evidence to bring to the court to substantiate her claims, and if anyone who's played Phoenix Wright should know, is that the Japanese courts are very strong reliance on physical evidence in order to make a claim, and a case. The same thing happens when you come to things like child services in Japan. There needs to be evidence of that, otherwise that more than likely you're just getting an investigation. It is also the matter of Kawakami's confidant that Cvit covers, and this is a big one because he lambasts how Kawakami isn't standing up for herself when she gets blackmailed.
The next time you see her at school, she's being threatened by the parents again, not only with the legal threats they've been using up until now, but they also reveal that they know she's a sex worker, causing her to lose all of her resolve immediately. You then have to go to Mementos to change Takase's parents' hearts. For the last 2 few ranks and she tells you about how they returned all their money and apologized to her. And now she could finally get the fresh start as a teacher, and she thanks you for helping her and knows that you're a phantom thief. The last few ranks of her S-Link are a very good example of the problem that Mementos brings into the narrative of the game. Kawakami could have easily, and probably would have, pushed back against Takase's parents, especially considering her claims that she was going to protect all of her students and be a great teacher who isn't bothered by rumors, but you are never given a chance to cheer her up, calm her down, or even meet with her at all until you go to Mementos and magically fix her life by beating up their shadow.
Gee, it's almost like the school is going through some hard times and scandals with their teachers. I mean, it's not like there was this one teacher who was abusing students physically, mentally, and possibly sexually. Oh, wait! Considering the events of the game, even rumors of Kawakami doing moonlighting as a maid that possibly does sexual activities could ruin her reputation and any possible chance to keep her as a teacher. Hell, there's one part in her Confidants story where you actually cover for her when another teacher begins to get suspicious. Obviously, Joker would want to help out, especially the people whom he considers to be close connections with. This can even be applied to Sojiro's confidant too.
So going to Mementos was actually completely worthless and changed nothing.
Even if he says he'll take care of the situation, it's not like helping him is something that's out of the question. I don't see why it's an issue, especially if it's just to help someone. There's also the general lack of, remembering that these characters are people. The things that aren't perfect, the things that like to slide back into old bad habits, the things that can have self-esteem issues. Characters in stories are allowed to doubt themselves. They're allowed to make mistakes. They're allowed to not be confident in themselves, and they're allowed to say stupid shit at times, especially when it's being emotional. Yes, sometimes there is illogical meanings in stories, and yes, you can call it out if it goes against the entire character arc, but at the same time, you can't just automatically throw away everything, otherwise it becomes way too much of a heel turn. And that's not poor writing. In fact, one can even consider that good writing since it makes the characters more believable in that regard, since not every situation is going to be tied up in a pretty little bow or go the way you want it to without any conflict. I'm not saying the writing of the game is perfect, but it sure as hell isn't as slapdash or as terrible as Cvit makes it out to be, especially in the Confidants. There is a little more about Futaba's Confidants section, and that had to be the weird take of
only had one friend in her entire life. Why is she making D&D references? A game that is intrinsically social. On top of that, one of the goals she tells you about in her S-Link is that she wants to learn more about her generation, but she's already a walking lexicon of nerd knowledge, bringing into question what exactly she wants to learn about. She already knows everything there is to know about movies, TV, memes, and gaming. What more is there to be able to relate to people of her age?
Despite the fact there are things such as online D&D groups, videos talking about D&D that are funny, games based about D&D, and the fact that we've seen that Futaba is willing to talk through text, it's almost as if Cvit doesn't understand the concept of what a hikikomori is and is using his ignorance to blatantly proclaim what she does need to learn, when it's made apparent that if you pay attention to her social link, it's actually being with people her own age in a physical sense, and not just spotting off pop culture references, because not every person or teen is Mishima and will get those references, especially in a culture like Japan that is extremely formal. But whatever, I'm done with the Confidants. The whole section isn't entirely bad. While I agree things like about Ryuji to an extent, there are a lot of things that come off as Cvit not actually paying attention. Then again, the guy did miss this.
Wait, we see all the ice go into the cup. How is it as soon as it changes shots, it's now all over the table?
Morgana! Transform!
Starts out perfectly fine and sets up a lot of cool, dark ideas for the game to tackle, but as more and more is revealed, the game can't seem to keep track with its own rules and results in an unsatisfying mess.
Funnily enough, I could say the same thing about this video. Now, like I've already said, I'm not one to shy away from saying that Persona 5 has issues with its story and gameplay. But unlike Cvit here, who straight up admitted to hating the game and such, which would naturally make him appear to want to look for any little negative to make the game look bad and make it seem his opinion is more valid.
And in one egregious case, both types of honorifics are present in the same line.
That's a bit of an issue. That being said, his critique gets severely kneecapped in the story and gameplay sections, and one of the biggest issues, as I've been slowly building up this entire video, is Cvit's amazingly lack of knowledge of Japanese culture. I know I brought this up earlier with the court system, requiring much more evidence than our own, and there are other things like the Aojiru stuff.
Or it is anything to go by, then it's also referred to as green drink. Why couldn't it have been called a vegetable drink or kale smoothie or green drink like the wiki says? One of them is even called onsen arajiru. I guess hot springs green drink was too difficult.
Funnily enough, if you actually talk to the clerks on any other days than Sunday, which most people would do in order to learn that they only serve the drink on Sunday, they outright tell you it's a vegetable juice. I don't know, it's really weird to complain about Japanese terms and customs as well as the social norm of people in a country without bothering to take some time to actually look into it. It's emblematic of the issues of this video, a lack of Japanese culture and understanding of the themes and traditions, both good and bad. But I think we should get to the actual meat of this portion and talk about his analysis of the story, and much like before, let's begin.
You already have the keywords of Madarame and shack, so you guess that he probably thinks of it as a museum and get a hit. Morgana also mentions that one of the keywords is plagiarism, but this doesn't make sense with the established rules that you need the 3 keywords of being the person, the place, and how they view it.
This is an odd complaint to me because, if anything, the first 2 cases that the thieves tackle are the outliers, because for some reason, Cvit neglects to mention that Kamoshida's keywords also included a 4th word, a concept called pervert.
Kamoshida, Shujin Academy, Pervert, Castle, beginning navigation.
Here we go!
While it's still a somewhat inconsistency, it doesn't break the rules that were established in the first case. Rather, the first 2 palaces had the concept of pervert and plagiarism. Considering they aren't really necessary to find the location as well as seeing the app has a microphone function to it.
Damn it! Screw that pervy teacher! Pervy teacher?
It's not so much of an inconsistency as it is an unanswered question. I'm not going to go into personal theories here, but the app just shows that it picks up keywords through the microphone of the phone. Hell, the anime cutscene picks up pervy teacher with Kamoshida, so that can easily be possibly as an optional keyword. Cvit decides to cut this out, however. And
upon changing his heart, he reveals that he used to be a student for a famous painter, Madarame, but that Madarame just used his pupils to make art for him so he could take all the credit, money, and fame. And then he asks you to look into him, and then our party immediately forgets all about him and doesn't actually follow up on this at all. Instead, a convoluted series of events happens which results in the party meeting Yusuke.
They actually do, and it's in a conversation through text messages. But again, Cvit decides to neglect the phone conversation that they have targeting Madarame, and also neglects to mention that they have exams during this time frame, and exams are kind of a big deal for Japanese students, so there's a necessity for them to focus on those.
Whole thing is, the main characters already had a perfectly good reason to go after Madarame from the Mementos target revealing Madarame's attitude towards his pupils. But the game kind of just ignores that in favor of having Yusuke approach Anne and having that be the way they get interested in Madarame instead. Coincidences can happen, but how lucky is it that only days after being told about Madarame from the former pupil, you so happen to be approached by Madarame's only current student, who is literally the only person in the world who could have access to Madarame's house, and that he just so happened to see Anne for the first time today while in his car and was so taken by her beauty that he decides to chase her on foot and asks her to be his model. This entire scenario is contrived as shit. It's hard to understand why that's even in the game when they already had an in to targeting Madarame.
And that's blatantly wrong. He even shows footage of Yusuke seeing Anne from afar when they are discussing after they got out of Mementos.
This is where you're introduced to Yusuke, the next person to join the party. But the way that
in paying attention to the morning events at the station, you learn from Anne that she feels like she's being followed. It makes the implication that Yusuke has been watching Anne from afar for a little while now. Do you see why this can be considered frustrating? For something that's claimed to be so in-depth to cover everything, the fact that Cvit outright neglects important information that goes against the notions he's peddling, his video title feels like it more applies to him than his own game. Persona 5 is not a perfect game, far from it. I'm not saying his video is full of garbage, but it certainly isn't the best criticism I've seen about the games. And there's a lot more issues with the story section.
The Phantom Thieves make their way to the top and get kicked out by Shadow Futaba, where we get the required Indiana Jones run away from the boulder scene, because of course it seems to happen in the desert pyramid setting.
I know this is an obvious nitpick and doesn't have anything to do with Persona 5, but the Indiana Jones boulder scene doesn't happen in a pyramid, it's in a jungle, which is pretty much the exact opposite of a desert. You see all those vines? If you're gonna make a reference, make it right. How do you get this wrong?
Now, when it comes to Futaba's dungeon itself, there's a lot to say about it. For starters, why is it a pyramid at all? Futaba has nothing to do with Egypt, and neither does her mom or Sojiro. She's never shown any particular interest in history, old ruins, or anything.
Oh my god, is this really a point? Ignoring the fact that Alibaba is associated with deserts, Medjed, which Futaba is the founder of, tells you this, by the way.
Boom Medjed, and we were freaking out over some weak-ass dipshits?
I discarded the Medjed name a while ago. I'm Alibaba now.
And Yusuke explains that Medjed is related to Egyptian myth lore in a phone conversation. Would it kill you to pay attention? Oh, and
the only justification is she calls her room a tomb. But this isn't really explained since the reason for her delusion is that she thinks she killed her mom.
yes, they are. Pyramids are tombs. They are tombs for pharaohs. What are you going on about? And I wouldn't have an issue with this stuff, but he berates the level design of the palace because he can't be bothered to pay attention.
And it's not like they couldn't have made it literally anything else. The inside of her dungeon even has air conditioning and is quite big, so it doesn't even come off like a claustrophobic tomb. In a meta sense, it's obvious that the setting of a pyramid was chosen because it's an iconic scenario in heist, just like stealing from a king in a castle, stealing the most valuable piece from a museum, and robbing a bank. But Futaba as a character does not have anything to do with this. Futaba is a hacker and a high-tech based character, and there is an attempt to explain this by saying that the pyramid has air conditioning and some squiggly PNG pixels and floating code.
I hate empty buildings!
I just can't.
Game, they talk about how the psychotic breakdowns and the change of hearts done by the Phantom Thieves are connected somehow, but Sai doesn't explain the connection between them, and it doesn't make any sense that she would connect them since one leads to criminals confessing their crimes and the other causes immediate death. In the larger narrative of the game, these are connected through the metaverse, but Sai doesn't even know that it exists. I guess it's just in the Nijima bloodline to have massive leaps of logic that turn out to be true. After realizing the school's principal is worthless to Shido, Sai's boss orders him to be killed, and he suffers a mental shutdown in the middle of the street and gets hit by a truck. When Sai learns about this and brings it up to Makoto, she says that since none of the circumstances surrounding his death add up, she suspects he's been targeted by the Phantom Thieves and had a change of heart. The random mental shutdowns have been happening far before the Phantom Thieves have even been a thing, and Makoto even brings up that it doesn't seem like something the Phantom Thieves would do, since they usually make people confess, but of course, this goes completely ignored. In a scene from the future, Sai even admits that it wouldn't have made sense for the Phantom Thieves to kill their own principal, but in the timeline, this takes place after Sai's had her treasure stolen, so there's no way to know if this is something she really believed, or if this is part of her change. After
What? Okay. Oh, there is so much wrong at this point. First off, he's flat out wrong about how one kills a person and the other makes a people confess their crimes. In the very beginning of the game, you see a train driver undergo a psychotic breakdown, which is the cause of the subway crash. He is still alive if you pay attention to any of the cutscenes between Sai and her boss.
According to the police, the engineer's life was not in danger despite his injuries. After questioning, even he could not explain his high speed when approaching the station.
Easy for Sei to think, these cases of people acting entirely differently out of nowhere may be connected.
With this derailment accident, as well as other recent incidents of unknown motive, concern is spreading among the general public. Just what could be causing such a drastic change so suddenly in these people? SNN has
Everything's linked. That's what you're thinking, correct?
And secondly, Sei never got her treasure stolen, and it's explicitly stated that they never removed her treasure. If they did, her past would disappear.
Treasure. We couldn't get it out of the metaverse. Except that was all an act. We had prepared an empty briefcase beforehand, and merely acted like we were taking the treasure.
So no, Sei doesn't have her treasure stolen. If it was, the Phantom Thieves' plan would go kaput from the beginning.
How are the characters supposed to survive floating in space with no protection to travel between unconnected sections of the space station? Because like we've seen in previous dungeons, for example Futaba's, the palace itself actually simulates what the conditions of the location is like how it was scorching hot in the desert. And that's a very valid question you'd be asking, one which Ann and Yusuke posed themselves. Now, there is a very good explanation for this given by Futaba, and the answer is when you're floating unprotected in space, in quotes, apparently you'll be okay for like 30 seconds if you keep your eyes and mouth shut. Wow, someone call NASA, because Futaba just figured it all out. All astronauts have to do to not freeze in 3 Kelvin temperatures and not suffer any harmful effects from the vacuum of space and its radiation is just keep their eyes and mouth closed. God damn it, Miss Frizzle, how could you not teach this to them? You see, until Arnold opened his eyes, he didn't start freezing here, proving Futaba right. Futaba's next line is that she used to think that you would just explode in outer space with no protection, which is reasonable and implies that she learned her revolutionary eyes closing tech from somewhere, but she never tells you how she got the information. Maybe she just made it up. That probably makes more sense than whatever explanation the game would actually give you.
Again, Cvit showing that he didn't bother to do any research, even as something as simple as a Google search. Because if you want to know something, people can survive in space for a very limited time, and granted what happens in space can be rather gruesome after that time limit, you want to know how long humans can survive? 90 seconds. Throw in the fact that the Phantom Thieves at no point spend 30 seconds in space at any given time during this section, I would also like to point out that Futaba is actually right in this situation about closing your eyes and mouth. You want to know why? Because if the liquids from your eyes or tongues are exposed to space, they boil off. I can't even... Look, I think I've made my point. There are a lot of problems with this section, and I don't feel like going over all of them. It's not a complete mess, but at the same time, I hope I get my point across and why some people have issues with this video. Because there are plenty of times where Cvit doesn't pay attention and berates the game for his lack of ability to do so. I love it when people make 5-hour-long reviews on games but don't actually pay attention to said game. That's real good criticism!
And I got a bigger dick.
Okay, so this is kind of going backwards, since this was the first major issues that he had with the game, but I honestly have to say that after watching this part of the video, I honestly had to click off the video and basically disappear into the ether.
Get in here!
I think the worst example will be how quickly Cvit contradicts himself in this segment.
Because of the game's bias towards physical damage, the strongest party for almost every battle consists of Ryuji, who's the only character who can learn charge and has incredibly strong AoE physical attacks, Yusuke, whose single target physical attacks gain damage with each baton pass, a core mechanic of the combat of this game, and finally Morgana, who works as both a healing machine and all-around generalized knockdowns using Lucky and Miracle Punch.
2 very boring minutes later.
The SP Adhesive 3 can be acquired pretty early on for only 50k, and this completely breaks the battle system with being able to spam spells non-stop all game, completely trivializing all dungeons because of infinite healing.
So, which is it? Is it the physical attacks that the game has a bias towards, or is it the spells that break the game? There are also weird complaints such as
Hifumi's rank 10 perk that lets you swap characters in the middle of combat is mostly useless because it takes up a turn, unlike other JRPGs like Final Fantasy X, where you'd have instant control of them. So when you swap a character, you have 3 entire turns before they get to go, which is usually more than enough time to kill whatever enemy you're fighting unless it's a boss.
oh no, this mechanic isn't like this one in this other game. It's not as if it can be used to, you know, change party members who are on the verge of dying, you want to get a refreshed party member, or you want to deflect an elemental weakness that your party has. Yeah, that doesn't matter at all.
Admittedly, turn-based combat in JRPGs is a hard formula to innovate completely on, but many games in the genre have managed to do it. Final Fantasy X has the sphere grid allowing you to customize your characters, and summons being earned throughout the entire game. Final Fantasy XIII has the paradigm shift mechanic. Bravely Default and Bravely Second allow each of the 4 party members to be any job in the game, creating hundreds of possible combinations for your party. Even classics like Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VIII have the materia and junction systems respectively. In Persona 5, as your characters level up, they earn new abilities in combat, but almost always are just stronger versions of things you already have, with a few exception to passive abilities or castable debuffs that make enemies that were immune to their attribute no longer have the immunity, leaving no room for meaningful choices since taking new abilities with higher numbers rather than keeping the old abilities is the right choice every time. There's no reason to keep Bufu once you have access to Bufula.
Which, yeah, no duh. That's kind of the point of getting stronger moves throughout the game. Why is this a negative? And it happens throughout many other games. I mean, Final Fantasy VII has like the whole materia system that allows you to level up your fire to Viagra and to Fyra. Why is this an issue? Other games may innovate, but just because there isn't innovation, that doesn't mean the system is bad. Sure, it may be a little lackluster, but if it's still polished pretty good like it is in Persona 5, what's the problem? Just because you have a broken team dynamic and think that your physical team is always good and you regulate people to be healing batteries in the background, that doesn't make it true. Persona 5 offers a lot more customization than you're letting it on with team composition. Just because you think it's a numbers game, that doesn't mean it's actually true that your choices are correct. Really, I have to say that your Lucky Punch thing with Morgana is actually pretty stupid because that relies on luck.
Haru comes so late into the game that she has none of the Confidant perks, like Baton Pass, Withstanding Damage, Status Recovery, so she is strictly just a worse character until you max her out, which most people won't do because she's introduced with less than 2 months left in the game. Most players are going to feel more obligated to actually finishing links that they started, rather than beginning another one and ignoring people that they're close to maxing out.
That is really off. Because Cvit is now attempting to step away from the own experience card and blow it up to encompass that every player will do this. Which, you know, if you had footage of people doing that, I might take you a little seriously, but he doesn't.
Be gone.
Don't get me wrong, Persona 5, is it a perfect game? No. Hell no. Of course not. But honestly, I'm not a fan of this kind of criticism, and I don't really care for how people are holding up the video as if it was an objective truth and people who disagree with it are nothing more than fanboys or haters. That's a mindset on the internet that I truly hate. That sort of thinking is cultivated in Cvit's apparent video takedown of the game. There are several inconsistencies, there are several mistakes, and there are things that are borderline make me think Cvit was dishonest with his analysis. It severely weakens his point and opinion of the game if he can't be bothered to look at what the game is telling him or how to actually use it. And what's worse is if you consider the fact that during the earlier parts of this video I was showing clips of something. Yeah, that was an article where Cvit was actually taking points from it and using it in his video. So it also hurts his argument by saying, no one's made claims like this before, when he's blatantly taking them. Here, let me give another example right now.
Where it shows that the translation team consisted of 6 translators and 8 editors. Editors are usually supposed to oversee the group's translation to make sure translations from different people fit together well. But with so many editors, I can only imagine this caused more issues, not less.
Now look, I have no problem with taking a criticism from other people that have made them, but at the very least, don't be like that guy who's saying, I'm the first one who's being serious about this. No, you're not. But he's wrong. There have been plenty of videos that came out well before his video that addressed many of the points he had. How does anyone realize how bad this game is but him? All in all, I really dislike the video, but knowing how the internet works, I'll just be hand-waved away as nothing more than a Persona fanboy who just cherry-picked even though I'm explaining my issues with the video and didn't want to cover everything. And that's the biggest irony of all this. Cvit literally did the same thing that Persona 5's villains did. Create a false narrative to villainize the Phantom Thieves. So Cvit, please, consider this my personal calling card to you, and have a nice day. I'm coming, and remember to examine your fandom.